Hi there and welcome to the show. It's been so troubling to watch my fellow Australians panicking, some truth warriors worrying, crying on Facebook live streams. A lot of people, the anger is starting to boil over, understandably so. Some people, they're still trying to comprehend and process this whole ordeal. COVID restrictions, all the fabricated test results, the unnecessary panic and fear, the ridiculous corona restrictions, and all the rules that accompany that. We must be brave, courageous, and have an outlaw mentality when dealing with tyrants. Working together, we must unite to overthrow our oppressors. Somebody that was a fearless leader and a proud revolutionary was Tupac Shakur. So joining me is John Potash, author of the FBI War on Tupac and Black Leaders. Thank you for appearing on the show. How are you going today, John?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
You're more than welcome. Now, Tupac, a remarkable individual, raised by Black Panthers. His mother, of course, was a very influential speaker. The Panthers were one of many groups that were infiltrated by the CIA and FBI in efforts to try and subvert the movement. This is a big problem that's taking place, and it was very pivotal to how it all played out back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, no doubt. Yeah, the Panthers were doing great things and starting free breakfast programs for poor kids who couldn't afford breakfast. Starting free health clinics, doing political education, doing housing organizing. They were doing a lot of incredible stuff. They wwere considered the best community organizers in the country.
Peace and prosperity they were trying to bring to underprivileged neighborhoods, doing so much community work. And CIA gets involved. They try and disrupt and try and stop the efforts that are being made. Now, 28 people that were researching and investigating the Tupac case, they died of strange causes. They desperately try and cover up key details surrounding this case, don't they?
They do. And so Tupac's mother, just so people understand how it connects, Tupac connects to the Black Panthers. His mother, Fain Shakur, was a one-time leader of the Harlem Black Panthers. And if people don't understand how the CIA connects to the attack on them, people, have heard a lot about the FBI attacks on the Black Panthers through the counterintelligence program. And we know about that because activists broke into an FBI office in 1971, stole thousands of documents, and found found out about the counterintelligence program, shortened for as COINTELPRO. And saw their methods of attacking the Black Panthers and other leftists, anti-war leftists, but particularly brutally attacking the Black Panthers. So researchers also found out that CIA agents, such as one named Angelo Galante, he became a head of the Bureau of Special Services in New York City Police Department. And it was the New York City Police Department Bureau of Special Services that was directly working with the FBI. And of course, obviously the CIA agent coming in, also the CIA, in attacking the New York Black Panthers. But people like Geronimo Pratt, who was Tupac Shakur's godfather and a one-time leader of the Los Angeles Black Panthers, he got his lawyers to get all of his government documents. And, of course, they couldn't get them all because they usually hold off on giving all the documents, but they kept suing it following the Freedom of Information Act and suing for more and more documents. And they eventually found that the CIA was working with the FBI and targeting him and murderously targeting him, trying to kill him. So this is the way it was working back then. And FBI whistleblowers, like, for example, a Los Angeles FBI whistleblower who worked in the COINTELPRO unit there named Wes Swearingen, said that even though after 1971, when these activists stole all these documents and sent them out to the media and sent them out to politicians, and it all came to light, The FBI was embarrassed, closed the counterintelligence program down. But he says what they actually did was they kept it going just with different names. So they hid the program under different names. And he said this when he came out with his memoir called FBI Secrets in about 1995. And he said these programs were still happening in the mid 90s. And so this, show loads of evidence how they were targeting Tupac and other, sons and daughters of Black Panthers, such as Fred Hampton Jr.
And you've done very extensive research, the history, the Panther movement, Tupac as well. And anytime there's a revolutionary that stands up, that's making progress, they try and hit people with lawsuits. Defamation seems to be a big problem. All these methods, they have so many resources. And his mother, Afeni, as well, was charged with conspiracy to blow up monuments as well. And she actually beat the case, didn't she, while she was pregnant?
Yeah, so she defended herself in court. She was the only Black Panther of the Black Panther 21 that was actually whittled down to the Black Panther 13. But the New York City Black Panther 21, they were originally called, had gone to trial. Some of them escaped. So she was the only one of the final 13 that defended herself in court, and the jurors basically said that they believe that she is the reason that they decided to find them all not guilty of many charges. And so it was really a big frame up. At the time, it was said to be the longest court case in New York City history. And there was certainly at least 2 books written about it, another autobiography of the Panther 21 published during that time. And one of those books about the trial won a National Book Award. And so it was pretty amazing what she did at the age of about 22 with no college education. She defended herself in court and did an incredible job. So she was absolutely brilliant. And so when she had Tupac in 1971, literally like maybe a month or 2 after she got out of jail and out of court, she said she considered Tupac her Black Prince of the Revolution. And so she raised him to be a revolutionary, not in the sense of taking up arms and shooting people, but in the sense of taking up arms just for self-defense, but training him, just basically having him, when she punished him, she would have him read the New York Times from cover to cover. So just really broadening his mind, having him read like crazy, having him, be really well educated in a lot of ways and really turned on to activism. And so, by the age of 13, a reverend in the area in Harlem where he was at the time asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said, of course, a revolutionary. And then when they moved to Baltimore, my hometown, he went to the Baltimore School for the Arts, where he learned poetry, he learned acting, he learned, he read Shakespeare, he rewrote Shakespeare into modern language and directed and starred in Shakespeare plays before he was out of high school. And he was considered, brilliant from the start, from early on. But because of some violence in Baltimore at the time, his mother thought that maybe it'd be safer if she moved him, and his sister Setchel and her to Oakland to live with his godfather, Geronimo Pratt's wife. Now, Geronimo Pratt was framed and was still in prison over there, but they went to the San Francisco Bay area where Oakland is, to a place called Marin City, and he lived there for a bit. But I show evidence that undercover agents had gotten Afeni addicted to crack, and that really took her out of Tupac's life for the best kind of parenting. And so he had to turn to other people. And but what he did turn to, he found Layla Steinberg, who was the manager, who was friends with Digital Underground and their manager, John Gregory. Yeah, and so but Tupac was very involved in activism at that time, and he was involved with a group called the New African Panthers, who were the young adult group of the New African People's Organization that was founded by former Black Panthers and former Republic of New Africa activists. And so, because his stepfather, Matulu Shakur, was a incredibly renowned acupuncturist who was a co-founder of the Republic of New Africa, and he was also framed and imprisoned by the time Tupac was a teenager. But by 17 years old, the New African Panthers, who were about the same age as the Black Panthers when they first started, elected Tupac as their youngest, ever chairman nationally, and they were active in about 8 to 10 cities around the country. So Tupac was already a national Black activist leader before he became a rapper. And so, of course, the new COINTELPRO, FBI's new counterintelligence program, would have been looking at him very carefully and very worried about him because of that activist leadership. So then he started to add, fame and fortune to that activist leadership. He decided to leave that chairman position in order to tour worldwide or tour internationally with Digital Underground, who were a Grammy-nominated group. And he made songs with them, and then he decided to try to get his own independent record deal, which he did with the upstart major label, like the newest major label, which was Interscope. And so that's when things really started being problematic for him, because they knew U.S. intelligence saw that he was gonna add so much wealth and fame to that activist leadership, and that's when he first started getting the arrests.
Excellent breakdown of a very important part of history there. And Tupac and his mother were fortunate to go to prestigious schools for performing arts, and that would have definitely helped, and also linked them in with very powerful figures that came to be later on as well. And, there's so much that takes place there. And then moving on, going to Interscope, Ted Field's daughter picks up her tape, listens to it, and then his career goes from one level to the next. And you've covered so much in your book. It's very impressive. I've been watching and listening to your work for a number of years, and it's also uncovered in the Rampart scandal. You had Los Angeles police officers working with Death Row Records. The corruption plays out on a large scale, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It's incredible. I mean, the Rampart scandal itself was huge, and that led to a writer named Randall Sullivan writing a book called Labyrinth, which didn't go as far as I went by any means, but it went pretty far in terms of covering Russell Poole, the police, Los Angeles police detective who became a whistleblower, and said that he found dozens and dozens of his fellow police officers at all levels of Death Row Records, and he asked the superiors, like, what are they doing there? And they said you can call them troubleshooters or covert agents. So basically, he found out that Death Row Records was a U.S. intelligence front company. Now, he didn't realize the full scale of this, this operation. But he did find, and he did say in the movie Biggie and Tupac and in the book Labyrinth, that basically Death Row Records was drug trafficking and gun running, and he didn't realize why and what that was all about. He didn't have such a huge political understanding of the fact that U.S. intelligence, is a drug trafficking operation. It's a drug trafficking agency on behalf of the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. And so Tupac was doing something that the oligarchs and U.S. intelligence didn't like, and that was leading the Bloods and Crips gangs to call peace truces and turn on to activism. And he was doing that throughout Los Angeles, and he was doing that with his Black Panther extended family. So they were just doing that throughout Los Angeles, and then throughout California, and then throughout the country. And he was hosting peace truce picnics and things like that. And this was a problem for the FBI and CIA, who wanted to see blacks killing each other. But they also wanted these gangs to continue their drug dealing, because they were the low-level kind of soldiers for the U.S. intelligence drug trafficking. And so by causing them to turn on to activism and stop drug dealing, to the point that this gang peace truce movement spread throughout the country. And in New York City, for example, I interviewed King Tone, Antonio Fernandez, and he was head of the largest New York police gang, the Latin Kings, and turned them into the Latin King and Queen Nation, the Almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. So two professors in New York wrote a book about that, and it was published by Columbia University Press, and it just basically detailed and outlined how the transformation of Latin Kings and how they had completely stopped drug dealing. So that took 3,000, literally up to 3,000 dealers off the street, and affected billions and billions of dollars of profits in just in that gang, stopping drug dealing alone. So this was a huge, huge blow to the oligarchs and the U.S. intelligence drug traffickers, because the oligarchs own the banks that do much of the drug money laundering. So this is why the CIA came in, and I talk about this more in my Drugs as Weapons Against Us book,
Yes.
The CIA War on Musicians and Activists, as you see the poster behind me. And so, I get into the details of how that all played out and how that worked, and why the CIA came in a much more major way regarding that. So, but basically, when Tupac first came out with his had a worldwide MTV release of his single "Trapped" from his first album, Tupacalypse Now. That was a political song and a very political album, record, CD, whatever. And so, Oakland police supposedly or purportedly stopped him for jaywalking, but what they proceeded to do was to choke him unconscious and bash his head against the curb as if to kill him. And I showed, different instances where police did kill suspects, in custody that way. Now, after that,
yep, that's
what's
right.
that?
There was also alleged a secret meeting that took place between the CIA, record executives, and staff, and it consisted of a plan to escalate the violence in the rap music to therefore feed the prison industrial complex. So it's a multifaceted operation. That's why you see some songs, Keep Your Head Up, and Brenda's Got a Baby, and really powerful songs. And then you see with a lot of other rap artists as well, there's this overall tone of the music changes to much more of a violent, militant one. And this was a large plan that played out. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, I've heard about that letter, and I didn't hear about that letter until after I wrote my book. I couldn't really verify the authenticity of that letter, but I can believe it, and I've heard different versions of that in terms of the possibility of that being true. Certainly Public Enemy, who were a very political rap group at the time, said he saw the rap label put tons more money into the most violent and negative rappers, and really take away promotion from the positive and political rappers like themselves. So that was a definite theme I talk about in my book, that was going on, no doubt. And so Tupac started out much more positive and political that way, but he also he did call for self-defense against police brutality. Now, I don't think that's negative, of course. I think that's a more positive activist kind of take. Like the Black Panthers also, of course, called for self-defense against police brutality, and that's why they carry their guns. But it was only really I believe, with Death Row Records that they really emphasized as much negativity as possible with Tupac, and really highlighted his more negative lyrics and picked his more negative songs. But by the time of Tupac's second album, or records, or CD, which was Strictly for My Niggas, NIGGAZ, which he said stood for Never Ignorant Getting Goals Accomplished, Time Warner bought into about 51% of Interscope to have a controlling share of Interscope. and they proceeded to delay the release of his second album by a year. They also stopped what Tupac wanted to be his hit single. He wanted to be Holler If You Hear Me, which is a much more political song, and they picked a less political song. And so they really had an effect and censored, some of that album, even though I think it was a really good album anyway. They definitely put their hands in that album in a big way. And so, of course, then they increased the attacks. 1990, it was about 1992 when Tupac was at the Marin City Festival, and strangers shot at him punched him for no reason, shot at him for no reason, and all in front of police officers that were security at the music festival. And then they proceeded they got a mob to attack Tupac. He had to crawl under a police officer's car in order to save himself, and for the police to arrest Tupac and his security stepbrother Matulu instead of the gang that was attacking him. And so that was another murder attempt of him, I believe. And of course, then there's the situation in '93 in Atlanta, where two allegedly off-duty police officers, the Whitwells, were starting a fight with a black man in front of Tupac's car. Tupac rolled down his window and said, "What's going on?" They ran over to his car, smashed one of the windows, shot at him, according to eyewitnesses. He merely rolled out the back of his car, grabbed a security guard's gun behind him, and shot back in self-defense. And that's why you had a black man in the deep South, Atlanta, shooting two white police officers and then not being taken all the way to court, in terms of being tried, because I showed the evidence that it was a failed murder attempt, number three or four, really. Tupac used his activist lawyer, Chokwe Lumumba, who was head of the New African People's Organization and was a former member of the Republic of New Africa. And so he also used a local independent lawyer. I believe his name was Ken Ellis. I interviewed him many years ago. And so he used some good activist lawyers down there, but basically they found that the Whitwells had stolen a gun from an evidence locker, which they call a throwaway gun, so that when you shoot someone and kill them, you can just drop it and it be unmarked and just not be traced back to the officer that did the illegal murder, that conducted the illegal murder. So that's some of the evidence that this was another murder attempt of Tupac. And so then they framed him on the sexual abuse charge, and in that case they only found him. Now, the person that started the frame up was a guy named Haitian Jacques Agnant. And, Tupac said in his lyrics, eventually he found he was, working for the feds, meaning the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI. But it took a long time to figure that out. And his lawyer, Michael Warren, had to get a rap sheet on Jacques Agnant, who was going by many aliases. He was a deep cover agent. But he found that he had dozens and dozens of major charges up and down the East Coast, all dropped, or all that didn't go send him to jail, or lead to major penalties at all. So he said that's a sure sign of a undercover agent. So Jacques Agnant first sets up the sexual abuse situation where the woman has consent. First, gives him a blowjob on the dance floor, according to eyewitnesses. She, in court testimony, said she kissed his penis on the dance floor. And I have of course the trial testimony. I got that from the court clerk. But anyway, actually from a defense attorney that was doing the appeals case for Tupac before while he was in jail. So she then has consensual sex with him that night. She comes back several days later. She had left voicemails on his hotel, voicemail saying that I like the way you fuck, and I don't know if we can curse on the show, but you can bleep that out if you need to. And so, police grab the voicemails from the hotel and they delete them, and they say it was they accidentally deleted them. They proceed to try to bully other women in Tupac's life to pretend like he assaulted many women. They do a lot of, there's a lot of foul play around that, but with all the police foul play and all the prosecutorial foul play, the jury found Tupac not guilty of forced sodomy, not guilty of assisting forced sodomy, not guilty of attempted sodomy, not guilty of gun possession, all these many charges they brought against him. They only found him guilty of touching the woman's butt against her will once. So both Ayanna Jackson was her name. Both her and Tupac said there was oral sex involved in that night. So after consensual sex, they say touching her butt against her will was something he could be found guilty of.
Yeah, they tried to stitch him up and fabricate this rape case and put it on him. And
right.
When you look at his music, it's all about empowering women. So many songs too. And helping and providing helpful information, uplifting positive messages. So
and
that to come back on him, it discredits. It's an operation to discredit a lot of all the positive work that he has done. Very upsetting.
Really
they use these tactics.
Right, it really was. And meanwhile, there's Jacques Agnon, who set it all up and was originally, brought to jail with Tupac. His case was severed from Tupac's, and he was allowed to just plead guilty to, touching her butt against her will also. But he got a slap on the wrist. He got like a misdemeanor for it all, which is like getting a speeding ticket. And so nothing happened to him at all. They basically let him go with nothing. And he's the one that set everything up. And so meanwhile, so Tupac is waiting for the jury to wait the verdict the night before the verdict's going to come out. Tupac's still trying to, make some music. And he happened to be really stoned when he was called by one of Jacques Agnon's associates to the Quad recording studio. He comes over there and proceeds to be held up at gunpoint in this area at about 11 o'clock at night. Now, this is the most well-lit area in the world at night. It's right near Times Square, which is incredibly well-lit. So why muggers would pick a place like this to do a random mugging is just absurd. And they happen to leave like some very expensive stuff on Tupac. I think it was his diamond-encrusted Rolex watch they left on him. But they proceeded to shoot him once. That sent him to the floor, and then twice in the back of the skull. And so I showed the doctor's affidavit of what happened, and the doctor described how 2 bullets went through the back of his skull and came out the front of his skull and barely missed his brain. Tupac was just incredibly lucky that he didn't die from that incident. It was obviously, murder attempt number 4 or so. So he survives that. Meanwhile, it's just a guy admits that the associate of Jacques Agnon's, his name's James Henchman Rosemont, had paid him to shoot Tupac in that incident. James Henchman Rosemont, there was government documents showing that he had already agreed to be an informant for the government before this incident. And this guy was a drug trafficker himself. He got convicted of drug trafficking later. And so that's basically what was going on there, but it was just, an attempt to kill Tupac. Tupac the next day gets wheeled into court because he wanted to appear in court, gets found guilty for touching this, Ayanna Jackson's butt against her will and assisting, Jacques Agnon for touching her against her will, just touching her butt, not sodomy, not forced sodomy, not attempted sodomy, but just that. And he gets 1.5 to 4.5 years in jail, and he's sent to a maximum security prison. And they give him about $1.5 million in bail. Usually you only need to or you get together about 10% of that to get out of jail. So between his family and his record label, they get together about $1.3 million. It's not accepted by the appeals court. He spends about 10 months in jail in a maximum security prison where they use all kinds of penal coercion tactics. which Amnesty International called the closest thing we have to brainwashing. Now, of course, I believe that there is something akin to brainwashing that they do through the CIA's MKUltra program, and I talk about that more in the Drugs as Weapons Against Us book. Nonetheless, they use all kinds of torture tactics on Tupac in jail. So when he came out, his head wasn't wasn't itself. He wasn't perfectly himself, and so he came out with the most negative lyrics he's ever come out with. And Death Row Records highlights those negative lyrics. And so Tupac, it's basically Death Row Records had offered 1.4 million versus the 1.3 million. And within days, several days, Tupac is let out of jail. The appeals judge allows him to go out of jail as long as he's signed to Death Row Records. And so they immediately accept Death Row's offer of the bail money. He goes to Death Row Records, and I showed the evidence that they continued the penal coercion tactics that Tupac was experiencing in jail to try to mess Tupac's head up. Tupac had sworn off smoking weed and drinking because he knew it was messing his head up and clouding his judgment to allow him to get into situations like he did with the Quad Recording Studio. He said he knew he could feel like that there must have been a setup going on there, but he was too stoned and drunk to just not act on his first feeling about it. And he went in there anyway and got shot. And so so he's with them. He signed a 3 CD record contract with them. He did the first 2 CDs with All Eyes on. With his last album, All Eyes on Me. His album before that, while he was in jail, was Me Against the World. Had stayed at the top of the Billboard charts for several weeks in a row.
It even beat Bruce Springsteen, didn't it? It was top selling in all of his records. Very talented and very poetic. And a lot of this story is actually told right throughout his music as well, from the Quad studio shooting. And in the Vibe magazine as well, there's a very good article at that. He explains Puffy and Biggie. There's 2 scenarios that play out, 2 very different versions of what happened. And as you said, and then bailed out, Death Row. David Kenner was a very important and very high-profile figure surrounding Death Row, wasn't he? And he was a very important instrument in obtaining bail as well. And then there's also other figures as well that were financing this record label. Some people, there was one gentleman, Harry O, as well, other people that were figures behind the scenes, pulling the strings and making things happen.
Yes.
Then the East versus West Coast rivalry hit, and that, created more violence, more tension, and it fueled a lot more murders. And ultimately, a lot of people ended up in prison out of that as well. That was a horrible tragedy, wasn't it?
It was. And I showed the evidence that these were all U.S. intelligence concoctions. The East Coast versus West Coast rivalry was a duplication of what was done, something similar, against the Black Panthers, where they pitted the Oakland Black Panther National Office against Tupac's mother's New York City Black Panthers in the Panther 21, sending fake letters back and forth between each other and having undercover agents pass false information between them. I show evidence that the same thing was done between Biggie and Tupac. So, they use that East Coast versus West Coast rivalry as a cover for what I believe were other murders of different factions, of rap in the rap world. And so, they of course tried to use that as a cover for why Tupac died, but with the situation with Death Row Records, it was founded by, as you said, Michael Harry O'Harris. And Michael Harry O'Harris was a big-time drug dealer. He was actually one of the 2 right-hand men for a guy named Freeway Ricky Ross. Now, Freeway Ricky Ross is highlighted in a number of exposés on the CIA drug trafficking. One of the top reporters who uncovered all that was Gary Webb, who wrote about it for the San Jose Mercury News for a cover story for five straight days. It was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but the other major papers pressured the San Jose Mercury News to stop, publishing his investigative findings. But he then published a book based on his findings, and he detailed how Freeway Ricky Ross was getting his bulk crack cocaine, very cheap crack cocaine, from CIA assets who were working with the Nicaraguan Contras who were fighting the socialist Sandinista government of Nicaragua. And they were basically what this Gary Webb called a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA, in terms of like a CIA army fighting to topple the socialist Sandinista government. So here, Freeway Ricky Ross is dealing with CIA assets, distributing trafficking this cheap crack cocaine throughout the country. But one of his two right-hand men was Michael Harry O. Harris. And Harry O's lawyer was Dave Kenner. And Dave Kenner starts Death Row Records and then makes himself head of an umbrella company for Death Row Records called Godfather Entertainment. And so Kenner was the real owner of Death Row Records. So then Harry O. Harris goes to jail, and Kenner and U.S. intelligence, I believe, gets this guy who's got more and more convictions adding up until 1990. He's committing more and more major crimes, but all of a sudden he doesn't get any penalty for those crimes. That's Suge Knight. Now they get Suge Knight to then start raiding NWA, trying to get the best talent from NWA out of NWA. The FBI had already been spying on NWA and sending them warning letters. So Suge Knight lures DOC and then Dr. Dre out of NWA into Death Row Records, and then keeps trying to lure Tupac into Death Row Records, and Tupac keeps refusing until the situation in jail. And so Tupac gets out of jail, he's part of Death Row Records, and later it's found out that dozens of police officers at all levels of Death Row Records, according to Russell Poole's findings, and they are basically a U.S. intelligence front company. And it turns out they had a number of goals. Now, Russell Poole says the key goals were drug trafficking and gun running. What I also found is a major goal of theirs was to stop the Bloods versus Crips gang peace truce and to stop their activism. And they were doing that within Death Row Records, starting fights between Bloods and Crips working for Death Row, starting fights and shootings at like Snoop Dogg's concert, for example, where people got shot and killed and the police did nothing about it. They just watched as if they were helping orchestrate it and making sure none of the players got arrested or anything was stopped about it. So they were completely countering what Tupac and his Black Panther extended family were trying to engender with the Bloods versus Crips peace truces. And that kind of led up to Tupac finishing his third CD, getting into fights with Suge Knight, saying, "I'm done my record contract." He fired Dave Kenner, who was his lawyer, despite the obvious conflict of interest. And within a number of days after firing Dave Kenner, Tupac's in Vegas. He's supposed to go to Vegas, and he's supposed to do a benefit concert. He's wants to see his friend Mike Tyson's boxing match, and he's supposed to do a benefit concert after that a judge had ruled that he must do because of a weed possession charge. So before he went to Vegas, one of his top two bodyguards, Kevin Hackey, said Kevin Hackey had disclosed after Tupac's death that he was actually also working for the FBI. Now, I showed the evidence that Kevin Hackey turned on the FBI, and he warned Tupac not to go to Vegas. Tupac took his advice and actually originally planned not to go to Vegas, but it turns out that the fact that he was supposed to do that benefit concert must have changed his mind and made him, decide he's going to Vegas after all. But he was very scared to go to Vegas. He was very worried about that. So he was wearing his bulletproof vest, but Vegas is so incredibly hot, he took his bulletproof vest off. He was driving his Hummer, but Suge Knight and the entourage convinced him to drink and smoke weed, even though he had stopped drinking and smoking weed for a month or two before that. They convinced him to party that night, and so his mind wasn't at its best, and he decided to just have his fiancée, Kadada Jones, who was Quincy Jones's daughter, drive the Hummer behind them while he drove with Suge Knight, because Suge Knight convinced him to drive with him. Meanwhile, there was no security guards in the car like there usually is. The Reggie Wright Jr. was the head of security, former Los Angeles police officer. Reggie Wright Sr. was head of the gang division at Compton, which was one of the original areas that the gang peace truce movement started in Los Angeles. And so Reggie Wright Jr. ordered all the security that were basically moonlighting police officers to not have their guns on them, and
Yes.
and he took the cell phones out of their phones. I mean, the batteries out of their cell phones, so they wouldn't work. And so Frank Alexander was behind Tupac instead of in the car, and he was the other major bodyguard for Tupac. And he said he was left kind of defenseless. That he couldn't defend Tupac in the situation. And so a car drives up close to Tupac's, a little bit ahead of it, proceeds to send 13 bullets to on the passenger side of Suge Knight and Tupac's car. Many of those bullets hit Tupac directly. None of them directly hit Suge Knight by all accounts, because he was not majorly injured. It was really said that he was only injured by fragments of glass. Suge Knight proceeds to drive away from the hospital after that. The hospital, if he just kept going straight a mile or two down the road, he would have ran into a hospital they knew was there, because he used to play football for UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And so he knew the area. But he drove away from the hospital, just drove crazy, drove into an embankment, and the police kind of end up coming to the scene. But Suge Knight was not helping the situation. He was really, obviously a low man on the totem pole, but he was helping set up Tupac's murder or assassination.
Great explanation, because there's many different versions and many different stories that people subscribe to, and then you have the Machiavelli death hoax. That's what a lot of people believe. You got the Orlando Anderson, Baby Lane, the death row chain that's snatched, the fight at the MGM Grand. A lot of people are kicking, but it really doesn't look like much injuries were inflicted. You look at through the music, and Tupac always alludes to faking his own death. Everybody thought that he was dead, but they got the story twisted. He was still alive. And then you look at it, Suge Knight's version, he said they were laughing after the shooting. On the way to the hospital, they were telling stories. Pac was very vocal, but they said when you have your lungs removed, the sort of injuries, you wouldn't be talking and joking. And how could you go from healthy to in critical condition and then pass away? Like the whole story, a lot of it really doesn't add up. That's what people subscribe to. Machiavelli, of course. Somebody else in history that staged their own death and disappearance. And that's not something that would be too preposterous to believe when he didn't want to break parole. He wanted to get away from all of the trouble, the violence that he's surrounded by. It seems a very plausible scenario. What's your take on this, the whole death hoax theory?
Well, I think it's just a lot of wishful thinking, and I don't blame people for wishful thinking. He was such an incredible man. He was so inspiring. I mean, to be only 25 years old and still have 300 or more songs that hadn't even been come out yet by the time he died, with all the albums he did come out with all the films he had already done. That some of them came out after his death, Gridlocked and other films came out after his death, gang related and all came out after his death. And so, sure, and he was just so prolific. He was really an intellectual prodigy. He had read hundreds of PhD level books before he was out of his teen years. So sure, I don't blame people for wanting him to still be alive. But from talking to his national lawyer, Jake Lumumba, talking to his New York trial lawyer, Michael Warren, talking to his mother, Potash Shakur, and others. It's they all think we're just very sad that he died that night. He died actually September 13th, 6 or 7 days later. And so it's Yeah, it would have been great though if he was able to escape, live and escape and get down to Cuba with his auntie Asada Shakur, his godmother, who was
Absolutely,
a
that's right.
chronic Black Panther.
And that's a very interesting take on it.
But
And the coroner was
but
also paid a
yeah,
large figure of money to disappear. The coroner hasn't been seen since. And then you have
mm,
a blonde female that was interviewed by news reporters, and she was also in a Tupac music video as well. And she does a lot of acting work, and she claims that she heard a helicopter, and then he left in a helicopter. So you have different versions of events here. And as you said about the music, so many songs, Suge Knight said it's mathematically impossible to put out that many songs in that given period of time. So, I mean, there's a lot of anomalies when you look at it. But as you said, he was a prodigy, prolific, working in the studio every day, sometimes all night as well. But, when you look at the number of records put out, the
yeah,
songs, yeah, a lot of it, there is definitely a mystery surrounding it. That's why there's so many documentaries that keep coming out and
yeah,
videos, because there's more questions that need to be asked, isn't there?
yeah. But Jeff, I'm sorry you were breaking up a lot in those questions, but basically, let me just say that I talked to his personal assistant, Molly Monjosi, and she said Tupac just worked 24/7. He worked so often, so hard. And when you talk to, I heard interviews of Tim Roth, who was the actor with him in Gridlocked, and Jim Belushi, who acted with him in Gang Related. They said Tupac was so incredibly hardworking. When he wasn't, acting in their films, he was creating videos. He was writing music constantly. He was just working so incredibly hard and all night long, and would come in so tired to the set for their making their movie the next day. He just was a workaholic, and so that's how he could put out so much incredible music before he died, because he really did think every day was sacred, because he didn't know how much longer he would live before they did him in. He had a sense that they were trying to do him in. U.S. intelligence, that is. Now with the Baby Lane, Orlando Anderson situation, Nick Broomfield called Orlando Anderson the Lee Harvey Oswald of the Tupac murder, comparing it to the JFK assassination. He said, Orlando Anderson received a lot of money right after Tupac's death. And it was obvious that he was, put up to be the fall guy in that situation, to be like the decoy, just like, Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, Orlando Anderson was killed off, 2 years later, so he couldn't talk. But that's basically, there's just lots of evidence that he was put up to take a beating just to make it look like it was, maybe a gang conflict that killed Tupac. They also, the press, the media is very controlled in our country. Many researchers, including Pulitzer Prize winning researcher, writer Ben Bagdikian, who was head of the University of California School of Journalism, has said that, basically documented that about 95% of our information comes from about six multinational corporations. Six multinational corporations have come to control about 95% of our information through interlocks with other multinational corporations. And that's the way they control all this information. They can do the bidding of U.S. intelligence in putting forth these different theories and the different ideas about, it's an East Coast, West Coast war that killed Tupac, Biggie versus Tupac. It was Bloods versus Crips feud that killed Tupac. They put up someone like Ray Kading, who's a disgraced former cop, according to Russell Poole, who got caught lying in court so blatantly that he was forced to retire early. They bring him out of retirement and have him write this ridiculous book, which is shown to be absurd, where they coerce, they basically give a special treatment and reduce penalty and prison sentence to a guy who's the cousin of Orlando Anderson, to say, we killed Tupac. Me and Orlando Anderson killed Tupac. And all the best evidence shows that no, that wasn't the case. It was obviously what Russell Poole said was obviously police officers, like trained professionals that killed Tupac because of the way it was all set up. It had to be his fellow police officers that did it. It was way too professional the way it was all done and carried out. And, Las Vegas crime reporter Kathy Scott said there was loads of police misconduct in just allowing all the evidence to be covered up, allowing witnesses to leave, not sending a police helicopter out to look for the murderers, not doing all kinds of things. A page and a half list she had of evidence that this was huge. There was huge foul play amongst the Las Vegas Police Department in the whole situation. And so that's just some of the evidence. The other evidence, of course, is she also says that there were FBI undercover agents in the entourage watching when Tupac was killed. And Kevin Hackey said he has documents to prove that FBI undercover agents and ATF undercover agents were in that entourage watching Tupac get murdered. She says they're supposed to stop whatever they're doing and immediately, intervene. And of course they didn't. And so it just so happens that FBI undercover agents and ATF agents were at the scene of Biggie's murder, 6 months later. And they were also at the scene of other, murders of political rap artists, but, that framed up other political rap artists. And so this is the way this, has all played out, and why it appears for sure that, this was a U.S. intelligence assassination of a highly political, highly influential, rap artist who at the time, was worldwide renowned and incredibly influential and incredibly beloved, and very worrisome to U.S. intelligence because of that.
John, that's an excellent description of an important part of history. Tupac was a very brave and talented individual, and that's to say the least. Your work is very thorough, very detailed, excellent. If somebody wanted to purchase your literature or follow up and watch your documentaries, how would they go about doing that?
Well, in Australia, I'm just not sure. I mean, you can look at more about it at my website, FBIWarOnTupac.com. It's also under John Potash is easier way to say. You said it right, Potash, but people can understand it better probably by Potash. So I'll say johnpotash.com. Either of those names will get you to the same website. And you can find out, the distributors. You can get it from me. I actually send it internationally for a little more money because it costs so much to send overseas. But I sell the books and the films from that website. And so, I'm pretty sure it's available through Amazon in Australia. The books are available through Amazon in Australia. It may just be by ebook though, that way. Sorry to say. But the DVDs and the films can be seen. Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the film, can be seen through Amazon, and I think through Amazon Australia, but it's got a number of platforms. I'm just not sure how easy it is. Right now, my distributor is just a distributor for America and Canada, and there seems to be a holdup when Russian television had asked me to buy the rights for it to be seen worldwide, but my distributor seems to be holding that up, and hopefully that we're going to end that holdup soon. We'll see.
Well, it's truly groundbreaking work, and I very much look forward to hearing more from you in future. I wish you the best of success, and you take care now.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, that does it for today's show. Be sure to hit the subscribe button because we'll be covering more celebrity deaths and mysteries in the future. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the We Are Change talk show, where we expose corruption one episode at a time.